Welcome to A Mason's Work, the podcast where we review Masonic symbols and illustrate how they can be used to solve problems in everyday life. With your host, Brian Mattox, a proud member of the Craftsman Online Media Network.
So I'm reluctant to continue the series here because the rhetoric conversation isn't done, but we'll come back around to it, I promise. I want to talk briefly now about logic. And so with the logic conversation, logic as a lens is really determined, the intent here is to evaluate for an objective truth. When we look at logic, we're trying to become aware of the sort of things that we're confronting or dealing with in a way that we can follow a course of intellectual reasoning to develop a sense for what is objectively true. Now, this is not going to apply in a lot of cases, right? So a lot of the things that you're going to want to do in your everyday life have a strong emotional component. Emotions are a sort of a fundamental part of the sort of human condition, operating system, whatever. So where emotions exist and are strong, there's no amount of the application of logic that's going to solve for that. Anybody that's been in sales for any length of time knows people buy emotionally first and then rationalize intellectually on the back end. This is a pretty typical process until you get to something like more complicated, like group sales. But even that, the group emotional dynamic impacts that. So when you're sitting here working with logic as a concept and evaluating the situations in your everyday life where you might find a logical lens is helpful, it really, the first litmus test is, does logic apply in this situation? And I know that's going to rub some of the engineers that listen to this the wrong way because logic applies everywhere until it doesn't. And so let's talk for a second about what doesn't apply, when it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply in situations where the experience is the outcome. And so things like music or song or romance and things like that, where you are trying to assess an experience, logic doesn't always kind of kick in there. Now there's going to be somebody, this is the internet, right? There's going to be somebody who can find an example where logic applies to the creation of a song. And while, yes, there might be, functional decisions as to how that happens, the emotive content really doesn't lend itself to a ton of logical conversation. At the end of the day, it's got to result in a positive emotional affect or negative or whatever. But applying logic sort of to the specific challenges you might be facing is oftentimes very, very difficult because you'll run into the places where your thinking isn't logical and you will gloss right over it. And so what makes sense in the case of really trying to apply logic to some of your self-development activity is to externalize it. You need to put it out in front of you on a table so you can operate on it. You need to write it down. You need to use slips of paper. Get it out of your head. The subjective space is not a great location. The subjective interior space is not a great location for objective, rational thinking. By writing it down, by putting it out of you, by getting it out of your noggin, you're going to find that you get the advantage of being able to operate on it in space. This is a big principle behind the Masonic symbols deck that I've cooked up on a Mason's Work website. But anybody can do this with 3x5 cards. Take some of these concepts that you're wrestling with or struggling with, take a problem that you're struggling with, figure out what logical assumptions you're making about the baseline of the current situation, and what of those assumptions can be challenged to help reinvent your current understanding of what's going on. When you start to do this, you'll find there is just a ton of ways that you can use logic to deconstruct a lot of your preconceived notions about the way the world works, and then reassess a new set of behaviors potentially that will help you move forward. The deconstructive process that logic really facilitates does create some discomfort as you go through it, because the biases that you will have that inform that that process are going to be very, very difficult to shake. So don't be surprised if you start applying logic and you start feeling and getting deep in your emotions when you do that, because it's a place where a lot of discovery can happen, and a lot of stuff that's happening sort of under the water will start to surface. So with that, we'll come back to, again, all of these. The liberal arts are just a wonderful place to explore the symbolism of Freemasonry, and we'll see you next time.
The views represented in this podcast are those of the speaker alone and are not representative of any grand or subordinate lodge.
Hi, Brian here. I wanted to thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have any suggestions or guidance for further episodes you'd like to see or hear, whatever the case may be, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at masonswork.com, and we will try and incorporate your suggestions into a future recording. Thanks.
Freemasonry teaches us that the true work is within, a lifelong journey of reflection, discipline, and discovery. At A Mason's Work, we help Masons bring out their best selves through meaningful self-inquiry and symbolic practice. From personal reflection to lodge engagement, we offer tools that turn symbols into action. Visit us at amasonswork.com. The work is within. The time is now.